Welcome to Middle Outcast Episode 3. In this episode, we're diving into a candid and thought-provoking conversation with Elijah Haahr. You may know him as the former Speaker of the Missouri House of Representatives, an attorney, and a voice in conservative media. Today, we're talking about the evolving landscape of politics, the impact of social media on discourse, and whether America is more divided than ever. Let's jump in.
In a time where echo chambers are the norm and polarization feels inevitable, isn't it time a podcast take a different path? Going beyond the noise, beyond the headlines, into the ideas, values, and perspectives that shape our lives. Welcome to Middle Outcast. Real conversations for a fractured world. From the social to the political, the philosophical to the personal, Middle Out Podcast is about bridging divides and finding common ground. It's not about combat, it's about connection. Not about sound bites, it's about substance. So, whether you're here to challenge your assumptions, hear new stories, or simply search for that elusive middle ground, you've come to the right place. This is Middle Outcast. Now, here are your hosts, Mike Bates and Tom Rankin.
I'm hoping to be a little bit more controversial in some of the questions and expecting maybe some real answers. But obviously, if you have political aspirations, that it may be risky to say some things that might be counter to your community's.
I think it
ideas.
used to be. I think we saw, most of our lives we've seen these tightly controlled, scripted political, whether it's a debate or a interview or whatever it is. I think that's changed pretty significantly over the past 10 years. And I think two things have done that. One is obviously Donald Trump. There's nothing scripted about him. Even his advisors will say you can't script him. And then, and somehow it has not impacted him negatively like a lot of politicians before him.
Teflon Don.
Yeah, exactly. Now, some people try to be like Trump and it does ruin them. He's a very unique political.
Yes.
The second part is just this. Long form podcasting has become very popular. I don't know if it's because people need something to listen to while they drive or run or what, but the idea of a 2 or 3 hour conversation is more normalized now. Trump went on Rogan and did 2 or 3 hours. Vance went on there. Like that's a normal thing.
Vance one.
The Vance one is really interesting. I actually thought it was more interesting to listen to than Trump.
Nice.
Primarily because even though if you know who JD Vance is, I got a side of him I didn't know at all.
Through long form.
Through long form.
Yeah.
I mean, conversations and pathways you wouldn't normally expect. He talked about how he's got like a really vulgar mouth. And he attributes it to his very poor upbringing, the military thing. But he talked about his like 5-year-old swear. And he's like, it's embarrassing in public. He's like, it's the number one thing my wife is embarrassed by. But he's like, that's just me. And so he swore repeatedly. And I was like, that we've never seen, LBJ had a filthy mouth, but you would never see that in a public interview because that was unheard of. Now it's more common. I think long form podcasts and then Trump have changed the idea that a stray word or an awkward phraseology will ruin you. So,
oh, well, I can appreciate that because that's sorely needed. And that's good.
It goes a long way toward feeling more normal, right? He normalizes
very much
politics a little bit to allow other people to feel engaged in the process. He makes it not taboo. There's not so much pearl clutching, right? So all of the apologetics were it's locker room talk and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it's okay, right?
And it's much more real, which is again after a lifetime for all of us of politicians that look the same, talk the same, and if they ever sort of banded out of there, they were skewed from political office. Now we have a much more, I don't want to say lower class, but we have a much more informal political class and things like podcasts, they're happy to come on and talk about anything, whether it's personal or politically unpalatable. They don't have a problem talking about it.
Yeah, sure.
It actually sucks that I think the left actually still really sucks at this. Like even now, it's still like, have you not seen how okay it is to be human? Just drop this over tight persona.
Well, I think that's one of the things. If you look at, Trump winning in 16 and 24, very close in 2020, he argues he won. The left, what was happening in America at the time, the left did seem to capture, take COVID out of it, but even like the podcasts, all the biggest podcasters in America, primarily the majority are, I wouldn't even say Republicans, but they're certainly right facing.
Yeah.
And whether it's Rogan or Tucker or whoever it might be, Theo Vaughn, all the podcast bros, the Democrats were missing that happening.
Yeah.
So they were focused on your traditional news media sources, press conferences, Sunday morning shows, and the Republicans were starting into the podcast, and the Democrats woke up after the election and said, "Oh my gosh, we've missed it." No, they haven't. This is cyclical. It'll swing back at some point. Gavin Newsom's gonna start his own podcast. I'm not sure he's the guy that will make it happen, but they've woken up to the fact that they missed they were not speaking to all of America during the campaign.
Yeah, clearly.
Yep. Clearly. Yeah. Yeah. And like, many of us, I think were in our, I don't want to say bubbles, because at least speaking for like myself and, present company, it was a rude awakening, thinking that like, hey, everyone gets it, right? Everyone gets that you can be real, right? Because Trump captured a realness, MAGA captured a realness, even though I don't get it. I get that it was a realness that needed to be captured. And I thought the left got it too. Clearly not. Like the world came to a different result. And I think that's a lot of why our conversations are becoming different now, because it was very evident that nothing was effective over the past, 8 years of the way that, we're trying to communicate as the left or whatever. Our party sucks at it. So we're hitting a reset button, and this is us trying to engage in that. And the name of the show, rightly indicates that as much as the media and everyone would have you believe otherwise, we're not far apart at all. And, MAGA was kind of lashing out of this, right? And now, like, let's just bump that stuff on the right and the left back to the center. Stop being so crazy and, like, learn from our mistakes and get back on path. At least in my estimation, things are pretty wild. I mean, if we look at, today's overwhelming daily actions, we'll get into that stuff later, I suppose, but like, we are now in the instant result of this explosion, and I don't know, something has to happen.
I had debates about this. Obviously, I host a radio show. It's more traditional radio show in the afternoon, 4 to 6 p.m. every day. And so the segments are like 15 or 16 minutes. So we don't do the really long form meandering conversations, but we've had some debates on whether or not there's a debate we've had several times in the past 2 years, whether or not we are headed towards a national divorce. And I have at least one semi-regular guest on the show that says we're past that. We just haven't papered the file. Like, clearly we're living in separate houses. We're no longer a part of each other. And we just need to like define where the boundaries are and start over. And the argument he makes is, people who live here, people that live in San Francisco or New York, what commonalities do we have? Aside from the fact that we live in the boundaries of the United States of America. Often we don't speak the same language, we don't dress the same, we don't have the same value system. There's really no tie that binds. And so his argument is, no, we are totally separate. We're balkanized, and we should just go ahead and paper the file and start over. I disagree. I still think that there's a value system that we can have, but I would in some ways agree that the United States of America now represents 2 or 3 culturally very different, maybe even more than that, very different ideals. And a Midwestern, culturally in the Midwest, they can barely recognize what might be a West Coast person or an East Coast person. Southern culture, also very different. And so I think we've existed like that in the past. Certainly you look at the Civil War, when we've had these big fights, but there are some people that are like, no, there's no more tie that binds, and it'd be better if we just went our different directions.
Yeah,
I think that's interesting, but you said you disagree with that
I do.
to a degree. But
and maybe it's me just wanting to believe that no, this great experiment still works. I mean, our 250th anniversary is next year.
Mhm.
Like, it's pretty cool that we're coming up on that. So I guess the question is, do we go into it as like, well, it's been a good run and let's start figuring out the differences? Or it's like, no, this is a good chance to renew the American ideal and find those things that keep us as one.
Exactly. That's what I'm hoping for. But I guess one of the questions that I have is, what differences in value systems do you perceive, right? So what are those differences that your friend would say are unreconcilable, that you think maybe not the case, but to identify that there are different value systems, I'm just not certain. I think that there are topics and issues that each side has potentially grasped to say, these are my battles. You've got woke on the left, or social justice issues, and you've got abortion on the right. Those are some of the big ones, but I'm not certain that the value systems are actually different. Those are more just talking points or more political topics that are currently headlines. What?
Yeah.
You think the value systems themselves are actually different about what people do value?
I mean, obviously, and listen, I think by and large, most Americans, and I don't want to say normal Americans because that's a strange thing, but most Americans who get up every day, they take their kids to school and they go to work, they have the same things that they want. They want safer neighborhoods and they want good schools. Like, they want to be able to make enough money to think on vacations and whatever. We have such wildly different opinions on how to get to those spaces. But I also think if you look at the history of America, you look at elections, we've always been pretty wildly disparate on that. I mean, the most any presidential candidate's got maybe 60 some percent, 61, something like that. And at least in the last 200 years. That means that there's always 40% that disagrees with that person, always. And most presidential elections, I mean, most of them are fought, the last few have all been within 2 points. That's pretty close. And so I think the real question is, are the issues, and the difference is a lot of times, you said it, they're on the social issues. That's where it becomes extraordinarily stark. We have differences on economic issues. I mean, tariffs can be a debate. Tax issues, the left thinks everything's a tax cut on the wealthy, and the right thinks, oh, everybody makes an income, it pays for everything. They have very different opinions, but I don't think they're as viciously personal as the social issues are. And that's where I think the value set, because it predominantly impacts social issues, that's where I think the discussion of, are we headed for divorce is.
So insert now one of the biggest topics I can't stop thinking about: technology. Technology and the concept of time that I think most humans just don't really comprehend. And so here goes. If we rewind civilization back to, its earliest roots, and we look how much time has passed since then, and we see how many civilizations have come and gone since then, how many religions have come and gone, how many worlds effectively have come and gone through that time. And then we look at our modern era, if we just look at the last 100, 200 years of time, and then certainly the last 50 years of time, where technology has finally exploded. Like, if you look at the time from when, for example, bifocals were created, from the amount of time when that happened to when the first computer happened, was very small stretch of time. But now, even in less than that, we've taken that power times 4 million in the matter of 30 years. And along with that came our communication. And so the ways we communicate And I can't stop thinking about the fact of the simple thing that, the phones that we hold in our hands and the way we communicate changed humans in the blink of an eye. And I can't help but think that that is one of the biggest problems. We already had problems politically speaking, and then it just ramped up to this insane situation where all of this is impossible to talk about unless you slow down. But the problem is that every bit of media, every bit of everything is breakneck. There's no time to think. There's no time to parse anything. And I think that's one of the biggest problems in the world today is that. And when it gets to the point of what do we do now? Do we just ink these papers and that's it? We're already separate. To me, that's technology. And we need to just understand our relationship with it more, because we're not going to get rid of it. But I think we can perhaps start a movement of understanding what the hell it did to us, because this is the first time in history of humankind that this has ever happened. And the fact that it happened so fast, I feel like we kind of fucked ourselves with it, because the technology is amazing. No one will deny that. But I don't think people analyze deeply what it's done to us as a species. It's very bizarre. And so anyways, that's when it comes to that idea of what do we do about this? Holy shit. I think we just need to slow down and talk, because the technology screwed us.
So it might be
one of many things.
I think social media certainly did.
Yeah. When I say technology, that's what I mean.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, if you think about dial back 100 years, start 200 years ago, 1824, you're getting, mail a month after it's been sent. You're getting newspapers weeks after any major thing happens. Yeah. And there's only one source. And so by and large, you ride into town and you communicate with people and maybe your neighbors, but that's sort of it. Mm-hmm. Then you dial forward and you've got radio and TV. And so you're getting more and more news and you're having more and more sources, but you're still you're reading, hearing what they say, and you talk to your few neighbors. And now move to
hearing
the modern,
the same things.
Right. And now move to the modern era, especially with social media, you can create a friend group that is an echo chamber. Mm. So the tribalism arrived when you could say, you could pick and choose, and we're all guilty of it, and some more than others. And it may not even be necessarily, I would argue, in some ways a bad thing to say, there's this big, do you only date people that agree with you on value or political values? You're creating subsets of friends based upon who agrees with you. And that has really dramatically increased the tribalism in the United States. Tribalism used to be much more geographical, because that was the only people you knew were those geographically around you. Now your tribalism is very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point.
That's the point.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, no, I think it is too, because
it's amazing because
it's more the social media. Go ahead.
Well, you're seeing now people, at least in my generation, they're withdrawing, not totally, but the idea of social media, I think, to people my kids' age, is less interesting than it was to us.
Yes.
We were fascinated by it.
Yes.
They're more so starting to withdraw from it. They still have their text threads, but even TikTok and YouTube, it's there. But the idea of having these online friend groups is less interesting to them than it was to us.
That gives me some hope, honestly. That's cool.
Yeah, I think that is hopeful. I hope they don't get sucked into. I wonder, though, if they can't help but get sucked into it, though, because once you gain political interest is when you start seeking content. And the way media and content is structured these days, it's just like YouTube, right? Their algorithms are designed to keep you in the system. So once you start to get kind of extreme content that confirms your bias, you get more of it, and you get deeper into it. And then you start getting into the fringes of it, and you're thinking, oh, well, I've already accepted all of this down the path, and you self-radicalize, right? When you start to gain interest in politics. And I wonder if the kids these days may get into that, because I didn't really get into politics or wasn't really interested until my 30s, maybe even my 40s, right? Politics are boring. Life is good. I'm paying my taxes. I'm raising my kids. I'm going on my vacation. Things are good. It wasn't until it started to feel more tumultuous that I realized I've been pretty naive in ignoring some of this. And I wonder surely that will happen to this younger generation at some point too. They'll gain a feeling of responsibility in their community and want to have facts and lead them, and they'll start seeking that stuff too, and will fall prey to the same thing that we've done to ourselves.
Well, and it's, I always say, I think conservatives by and large don't want to be political. Conservatives just generally don't like the government. They don't want to deal with the government. They want to go out, they want to make money and have kids, and that's what they want to do. And so that's why conservatives generally get involved when they're older, is because in some way government is messing with their ability to create a business or to have children. Liberals, on the other hand, generally get involved younger. Part of it is, the term progressive, you want to change things. And so they get involved at a younger age because they see the government as a change agent. And so they get involved in politics a lot younger. Now, obviously, you see some younger people get involved on the conservative side, but I think by and large, the old adage about if you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart, you're not a conservative at 40, you have no brain. I think that actually is borne out in a lot of the age that people get involved in politics.
That makes sense. And it certainly makes sense to me too, that people on the left would get involved more early, specifically as you're saying, because I just wanted to kind of cherry on top that point, is that they're advocating for social issues, right? It's identity politics too. They can see the social inequalities pretty easily, and then also see the government as that change organization. It makes sense to me that they would advocate for change when they can clearly see it, right? It's not until, say, as you say, on a conservative side, you're not seeing those issues necessarily until you're getting older, because you're not involved in some of the more social justice or identity politics issues.
Yeah, you start bumping into the government when, and you're like, well, why is the government here? I just want to do this. And then you start to bump into it. So.
Yeah, that's what, and that's, it's always fascinating to me when you can play those lines out and then see it's often, seemingly more often from a conservative mindset, you'll see people go, oh, wait, you want to do what with what? And then it's when it affects me, right? It's because you're right. When you're focused on family, job, your worldview is pretty narrow. I mean, because you're focused on your family. And you're not even afforded really the opportunity, or, how can you focus on the greater thing when your needs are so close to home?
Right.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. And then later, the kids are out, you have more time, you have more whatever. And then wait, now you're getting in the way of what? This is not right. Thank you for realizing finally.
My early exposure to politics, I was born in Iowa. And my parents decided, my dad he had an education degree, but he did construction. My mom had a social work degree. So they both had worked with the school systems, and they decided they wanted to homeschool us, partially for religious reasons, partially they just thought they could do a better job. So they start homeschooling my older sister, and then me, and then my younger brother. Well, at some point, they realized that homeschooling in Iowa was not a recognized, there's all kinds of problems. The schools could come in, they could audit you, they could make you take tests, they could take your kids away for truancy. It was not recognized in Iowa. And that was my first exposure to the government. And so my parents decided we're gone. So they looked at a few states. My dad was doing construction. This was around 1990. They had heard, there's a lot of home building going on in Springfield, so we'll move there. And so we moved here, and then every year we would go up to the Capitol in Jefferson City, and they would introduce us they would go talk to the reps and be like, hey, we moved here from homeschooling. We want to keep the homeschooling laws here that are really good. And that was my first exposure to politics and government, aside from just learning it. But essentially, that's the conservative, that's how every conservative starts to, you do something until the government gets in the way. And you're like, whoa. Who is this group telling me what I can and can't do? That's how I end up sort of interested in government. That's how my parents first got interested in government.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got to admit, I'm pretty libertarian at heart, really. I think more than I'm left or even conservative.
I don't even know. And it's always the worst say, are you, Republican, Democrat? I hate labels so much. I really do. I guess my voting actions would always, tend to manifest Democrat but that's how the ballots are. But yeah, I hate labels. I hate all that stuff because there are ideals on both sides that, whatever, it's so stupid. But no, yeah, that all makes sense. I never really thought about it from that point. it goes that way because that's your worldview. No wonder that's how it.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's so great. I'm curious about one thing. You got into politics at a young age. What the hell is it like in there?
Oh, yeah.
So
what like from the curious on the outside, because everyone just thinks it's just like Wizard of Oz, like what's going
what's
on
behind the
back
curtain?
there, right?
Exactly,
Like,
yeah.
And we've been in an interesting spot as the company that we started, that we're kind of adjacent to policy because the payers of our system is Medicaid, and so like we've seen just a little bit, of how some of the stuff works in there, and have been involved in it, and it's just made me so curious. Like, I have a profound respect for the amount of work that goes into all of this, and I think that's probably lost on a majority of people. I mean, like, speak to this.
So I tell everybody I know, I'm like, everybody should run for office at some point. I think it's a great personal experience. And the only thing better for you than the run is if you get elected. Two things. One, the run, you meet your neighbors and neighborhoods in a different way than you ever expected. A lot of that is social media. You have preconceived notions about what everybody thinks. Then you go out there and you realize the nuance and depth of that. When we go back to the last election, I think that's one of the reasons, and we could get into the real political realignments, but MAGA and Trump became the working class party. The Democrats were the party of the rich elites, and the Republicans, even though Donald Trump is a Wall Street billionaire, is the party of middle America, which is pretty crazy to think about. But a lot of that was the podcast. People in Springfield, Missouri, driving around, listen to Theo Vaughn or whoever it might be, talk to Donald Trump. They're like, oh, that's pretty good. They're not watching the news. No. They don't hate the news. They hate watching
That's right.
Right. And so, regardless is, I think when you go out and you go campaign, especially when it's not a tightly scripted, tightly controlled campaign. So for instance, this is a fun thought experiment. The reason I think that Donald Trump has an intuitive understanding of people.
Oh, yes.
When Ron DeSantis ran for president against Donald Trump, Ron lost for two major reasons. One is because there was the raid on Mar-a-Lago and the whole Republican Party coalesced around Trump, is like, they can't do that to us. The second reason is because when Ron DeSantis ran for the governor in Florida, Florida's a big state, bunch of expensive markets. Ron figured out, I got to go on Fox News and I got to own the airwaves. And so he became a fundraising juggernaut. Running for president is totally different than that. Your initial states, Iowa, New Hampshire, they're small states. Those people expect to meet you and get an understanding of you. And DeSantis did not thrive in that format. And it's primarily, you think about a lot of the people who've gotten elected president, whether it's Bill Clinton or Jimmy Carter, a lot of them, they were really good retail politicians. And so going to Iowa, going to New Hampshire, they can walk into a diner and in 10 minutes, they're friends with everybody and they're really good at that. And so they would win these early states and it propelled them to the White House. Trump, even though he doesn't seem on paper like he'd be good at that, he understands people very well and he figured out how to connect with people like that. And the MAGA agenda does that. And so I think it's the same. That was my experience when I left my house and I literally had palm cards and started knocking on doors. I had such a different understanding of what my neighborhoods and community cared about, wanted, what motivated people than I did from what I thought I knew. And so that's why I always tell everybody, running for office, incredibly personally rewarding, very thought-provoking, changes the way you look at everything. And then the only thing better is if you get elected, because then you go to Jefferson City or Washington or City Hall, wherever you go. And I think from the inside, it totally changes how you look at the process. By and large, I would say 2/3 of the people that are in elective office are good, decent people trying to do the best they can.
2/3, okay.
Yeah. The other third is a combination of people that either, they're out there for the wrong reasons, or they're trying to make money, or they got the spot, but they don't really care. Like, there's a third of them that aren't as great. Now, but 2/3 of people, even like left, right, whatever, if you get elected to office, if you get elected to the state legislature, You get elected in November. In usually like the end of November, early December, either right before or the right after Thanksgiving, they do a freshman legislative bus tour. So all the brand new people, say 30 or 40 of you, jump on a couple buses and you spend a week just going around the state. And you sit next to Democrat, like, you'll meet an octogenarian from St. Joseph and an urban Democrat from inner city St. Louis. And you like see these parts of the state with people you didn't know, all ages, genders, nationalities, totally different backgrounds. And again, it's like you see this, oh my gosh, I never thought about an issue from this perspective. I remember the first year I was on the legislative tour and a preconceived notion, okay, with really bad poverty in St. Louis and Kansas City, and it's getting worse in Springfield. And then I found out on the tour, oh no, the worst poverty in Missouri is actually down in the Boot Hill. It's like Hayti Heights is just this incredibly repressed community. Unemployment was like 40%, like crazy. But you don't know that because you just perceive, oh, our really depressed areas are going to be urban decay,
inner city, yep.
Right. And so I feel like you develop an incredible understanding of the state that you didn't have before, perspectives you didn't have before. Now I've got really strong opinions on political things. You talked about controversy earlier. I don't like the idea of term limits. I think term limits is a bad concept. Missouri is one of 13 states that have term limits for their legislature. I think that's the number. And I was the beneficiary of that. I would have never gotten elected as young as I did without them.
Some redistricting happened here in the area, right?
Right. But I also, I always say now, unless you are going to term limit the bureaucracy and the lobbying corps, you are setting the legislators in at a disadvantage. You spend your first year and sometimes two sort of understanding how the process works. It's like walking into an old popcorn popper where everything's flying around and trying to figure it out. And then once you get it, then it's like, well, we've got a limited amount of time. So I've got to figure out if I want to try to be a chairman or if I want to run for a leadership position. But there's no long-term systemic change you can effectuate because your time's so limited there. Whereas bureaucrat can be there for 40 years, a lobbyist can be there for 40 years. And he was not a kind of them like, okay, you hate my bill, that's fine. I'll wait a few years, you'll be out of the way, I'll get the next guy to do it. Like it's very normalized up there.
The lobbyists effectively get to run things.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say they run things.
Not to run things, but they maintain a over-influence of power because
of course
they get to project, well, I get 8 years of people to work with because...
And also, we will probably never do remote voting in Missouri. You're always going to go there and vote together. But if you diffuse the power from Jefferson City and said, hey, everybody, just stay in your districts. Get on your little Zooms every day, listen to debate, and then vote. The lobbyists would have no influence at all because most of their influence is they're in the Capitol all the time. They're hired to just sit in your office and hang out and be like, hey, what's up? And so you kind of develop a friendship, and some you trust and some you don't. Some are good, some are bad. Yep. But by and large, they're the people you're around. And so I think, while you're in there, that pressure cooker of the Capitol, they're like your neighbors at the time.
Yeah.
And so if the neighbors are all saying one thing, you're like, oh, I get that point. And so I think term limits puts legislators at a distinct disadvantage there from an inability to really affect long-term change in Missouri. Now, I know a lot of Republicans that think it's a good tool. And I would suggest that I don't think term limits I don't think we've had better presidents than we've had congressmen because we have term limited presidents and not term limited congressmen. I think you can find good and bad on both sides. And I don't necessarily think it's been one way or the other.
What about longer terms for that?
You could do that.
It's 4 terms in the House and in the state anyway, right?
Right. So it's 8 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate. The House is 2-year terms. The Senate is 4-year terms. They're staggered.
Even doubling feels like it would give you because I agree, that's not a lot of time. I mean, we've been doing our business for 6 years and it felt like we spent 6 years learning things
well, and in what industry would anybody say, hey, if you go into my industry, you can only do that job for 8 years.
Right.
And you got it done.
Exactly.
I mean, you would never be able to hire teachers if you're like, hey, you can do it for 8 years, but then you got to move on to something else.
Yeah.
You would just never be able to do that. And, I think term limits grew out of a frustration, particularly in the 1990s of corruption in Congress. And it absolutely existed. Yeah. But the corruption, a lot of it, to the extent that there was, the House bank scandal in the early 1990s, that got fixed without term limits. Now corruption has changed. Now today you've got this issue of, you got Nancy Pelosi trading accounts where if you put your money into a certain thing, it trades it like Nancy Pelosi, and that stock account beats the market every year. Well, clearly she has access.
I need to get on the Nancy Stock Exchange.
I mean, it's crazy.
What's the stock ticker?
If you listen to the most recent Tucker Carlson podcast,
that'll be hard.
He interviews.
If I get money out of it.
This is one though. It's very nonpartisan. He interviews a guy. He's 29 years old, and he basically started watching Pelosi but like investing like her. And he's like, man, other people should do this. So
how do you invest like Pelosi?
So all congressmen have to disclose their trades publicly.
Oh, okay.
And so in 2020, there was a guy who has a podcast called Unusual Whales, and he would just start noting,
oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Look at these big trades that are being made. So he'd like note them. Well, if you dial back, there was a senator from North Carolina who on February, he was the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So this is February 7th, 2020.
This is ringing a bell. I'm trying to remember this.
Richard Burr, you're starting to hear rumors about like the sickness in China. So he writes an op-ed on February 7th and says, guys, this COVID thing is not that bad. And he's the Senate Intelligence Chair, so he knows everything. On February 13th, 6 days later, he liquidates his entire retirement account, sells $1.65 million, sells it off. Then, and we only know this because there's an investigation, then he calls his brother-in-law.
That's right.
Spends 30 minutes on the phone with him. His brother-in-law calls his own financial guy and sells his retirement account. Then Burr starts calling his donors and saying, you should sell your retirement account. Within 3 weeks, the market drops 30%. Well, he knew it was bad. He knew this was coming. And so
and was in a position to influence the markets.
Right. So the DOJ and the SEC, they all investigate him. Eventually they don't have recordings of what he said on the calls. They just made some calls and he sold his stock, but they couldn't prove anything. And so nothing happened. So corruption exists no matter what. It just changes forms. But a guy in 2022 started an account because he noticed that every time Pelosi bought stock, within 2 weeks, there was some great news and the stock shot up. And if she sold stock or shorted stock, it was collapsing. So he set up an account to track her trades.
Just to track her trades.
And now he's got something, it's called like auto something, where you put your money in and it just, when she buys something, it buys something. When she sells something, it sells something. And he's like, we're crushing the market. We're crushing it. He's like, we beat it's insane. But he's like, we'll beat Wells Fargo, Edward Jones easily because he's like, they don't even have the information she's got. So he's like, if you want to invest, don't hire somebody. Just put your money in our thing and we'll crush the market.
Get in the Nancy fund.
Yeah.
I've got to get in on this because my Kellogg stock is just not cutting it for me.
Well, so with her leaving public office, though, so she'll have less requirement or no requirement to publicize that anymore.
Right. And so you can literally set it up to match
still
anybody.
Got books, though, right?
You can set it up to match anybody you want. Anybody in DC, any like comment, whatever you want. You can just set it up like that. And it's very hard. Insider trading is very difficult to prove. Unless you've got somebody that'll testify, listen, I sat across the table from Nancy Pelosi and she's like, please sell your stock because they're going to announce in 2 days that they're recalling everything. Absent that, you just look at the stock trades and be like, maybe they're just really lucky.
Right.
Maybe they're just the luckiest person alive.
It's easy to see, hard to prove.
100%. Right. Yeah.
Oh, man. That's so good.
You know the corruption is there. Well, there's so many topics to talk about, right? Because it's like fraud, waste, and abuse.
Yeah.
I want to pick off a short one.
Yeah, okay.
That's modern. Like,
sure.
So I picked up on this. You said, 2/3 are like legitimately there to, do good and do their job.
Total rough estimate, but I'll say that.
Sure.
I've always wondered of the same because that seems to be, I'm always very charitable. And when I'm, as frustrated as politics can be, I do believe that most people are there to do good. So I'm curious, how do you work with the rough percent there that is just clearly there to whatever, enrich, just sponge up, be a pain in the ass, like, just that is there by definition to be a thorn in the side. How do you work with that?
So the best people in politics and really in life is the ability to meet somebody, to understand what it is that they want and be able to say, okay, I need something from them and I can help provide what they want and in order to get. And so if you get to a place even the 1/3, listen, if of that 1/3, and maybe it's a quarter, maybe it's 20, whatever it is, some of them are there and they're just contrarians.
Yes.
And so if you can be like, hey, I'll help you be a contrarian in this other issue if you can help me work on this issue, or I can show you why you helping me allows you to be a contrarian to everybody else.
Cool.
Some people, it's a grift. And you're like, listen, like there's value in this long-term if you support my bill. I don't know, like I'm not giving you the value, but I'm sure you can figure out the value if there's a lot of, you just have to figure out what those people are there for and how to find out to get them to a yes so that it benefits them and it benefits you. And, not only like I ran for office here in Southwest Springfield, it was the 134th district, but then it's like a chess game within a chess game, because then you get elected here and then you go to Jefferson City, and then I ran for leadership there. So now your vote is within the caucus on the floor. So that's a whole new group of voters, and they have very different opinions and very different needs and wants and issue sets than your folks back home. And now you have to go campaign amongst them. And you're campaigning against a bunch of people that are very talented, that figured out how to get, 30,000 people from their home district to send them to Jeff City. And so then you develop this game within a game aspect. And it's a fascinating, the life of politics and the life of government. And I was in state government. And I think some people think that federal government is like state government on steroids. I actually think it's the opposite. I think what you can do in state government is way faster because the scrutiny is different, but it's also the ability to effectuate change happens so much quicker.
Yep.
I mean, our House of Representatives is 163 people, which is the fourth largest body in the country.
That's right.
I don't know why in Missouri it is, but the ability to effectuate change in Missouri is way quicker than it is in a 435 member U.S. House of Representatives. And so I think it's, Jeff City is like life at 1,000 miles an hour. And I think one of the hardest things I did, I'm a lawyer. I don't practice a lot, but I still practice a little bit. But when I left the legislature, I was working at a large firm, did a lot of corporate work, mergers and acquisitions and things like that. And I felt like I had gone from this like bullet train into jello, and life just it felt like it ground to a halt. Now, really what it was is I basically was eating Snickers every day. And then I went back to eating oranges and I'm like, this isn't the same. And then after a while, you're like, oh, actually, this is really good. It's just you just have to understand it in a different matter.
Yeah, right. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think even we've experienced that just with our little taste in being adjacent to policy and such in Jeff City, it is kind of just the same. You just have to shift your brain to apply different labels. It's the same psychology. It's the same whatever. It's just public service.
One of the things that I think may be interesting, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I really don't know. I have this inclination or this gut feeling that, as you're suggesting, state politics, I think, can be less controversial in the topics that you're taking forward to your constituents. I don't know, but I assume that because you're focused on state issues and objectives, that you don't necessarily have to get into all the social justice stuff or even go full MAGA. But maybe I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
But it seems to me that that there's more performative politics at the federal level than at the state level.
There are more performative politics at the federal level, but that's because you almost never vote on the issues like these big, super conservative, like you might take one vote on abortion every 5 years in Congress. Maybe it's in the budget on whether or not we're going to fund, but you almost never take a big vote like that. In the state, you're taking votes like that multiple times a session. And so you actually take a ton of votes on very controversial issues all the time. And a lot of the issues that get debated at the national level, they never get to a vote on the national, but they get to a vote on the state levels all the time. Look at the, Save Women's Sports. The idea that people should participate in the sport and the gender that they were born. Ton of conversation about that at the national level. But I mean, they almost never, maybe one time has our congressman ever voted on that. Twice, I don't know. But at the state level, that bill it passed a couple years ago, and it passed with a sunset. It's already back up. It was added to a Senate substitute a couple weeks ago in our state Senate. So everybody's voted on that issue multiple times a year. And so although it occupies a lion's share of debate at the federal level,
Yep.
it actually, you vote on a lot at the state level.
That's fascinating, actually. And I get that, because it seems to me then, because you're in front of your constituents more, they're looking for some note of progress.
Well,
how many of the votes are, that's not the word performative, but certainly at the federal level, I don't follow the state politics as much, but certainly there are votes that occur at the federal level that are there that are just optics alone, right? They're entirely optics.
Press release
all
legislation.
The Democrats are going to vote against it. All the Republicans are going to vote for it. And now we have a talking point we can go out to the public with. So it seems to me that is the same thing that's happening a little bit at the state level, where you have to actually show, though, your constituents, I made this vote, we passed this thing.
So but the thing is, at the state level, you actually pass the bills. So at the federal level, I mean, they pass so few bills. They vote on stuff, but almost nothing passes. State level, I mean, even last year, I think last year it was like the lowest numbers bills we passed in about 30 years, and we still passed like 30, 40 bills. When I was there, I think the high water mark was probably 2018. We were passing like 150, 160 bills a year. So it's a lot of bills. And then some of those bills are omnibus bills. So it might be 30 different little pieces of legislation put together in one large package, and you can get it done that way, but didn't have time to get the other ones done. So you're actually moving a ton of legislation and making significant changes in the state every year. At the federal level, it's like you're trying to turn a battleship and it takes forever. And this is like a speedboat, just zipping in and out of issues and moving around.
It's interesting just to talk about at the federal level that you're trying to move a battleship. And I agree that it's probably slow, I guess, but the question is how much interest do people actually have in change? So, for example, when Republicans had access to the House, right, you had opportunity to vote on migration issues and did not. And especially even when the Democrats obviously brought up the immigration bill that they did, that was very much a contrition to Republicans to say, hey, now's your opportunity to come to the table, clearly in order to get Biden an opportunity to win, because they held the vote that long, right? And Republicans rejected it at that point, right? But I guess that's the question, is how much is actually about trying to get things done versus just trying to get reelected or get U.S. mindset shift. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
totally. In order to gain, because I don't think you're not going to get super majorities. I don't think. Now maybe you will, but I don't think it's going to happen.
As a kid, my dream, like when I really got interested in politics, my dream was to go to Washington, D.C. And then at some point when I was in Missouri and I was watching what happened, I realized you can't effectuate that much change in D.C. You got to be president or a judge. Congressmen and senators, again, they give a lot of speeches. Every once in a while, you might manage to push something through, but you almost never. Most big changes at the federal level are now executive orders and judicial decisions. But in the state, in Missouri, legislature does a ton. And so if you want to actually change the conversation, move the policy ball, do it at the state level. And I remember, I don't know when it was that I realized I didn't have an interest in going to DC, but at some point, I mean, the congressional race came open in 2022 and all these people called like, oh, you're going to run, And I was like, no, I've seen what DC is. I love to visit. I love the people that go up there, but it's like the best day of your life is the day you get elected. And every day after that's worse.
Yeah.
It's just not the same as, I think there was a time, a long time ago, where big changes happened in the U.S. House of Representatives, in the Senate. That time is gone.
Is it because the times don't really actually demand them?
I think a part of it is the rules in Congress make it very difficult to make changes, whether it's, the filibuster in the Senate, cloture in the Senate. They don't even really debate each other. They have their 1 minute little scripted C-SPAN talking moments, but there's not long form debate. The days of Daniel Webster standing on the Senate floor debating about keeping our union together with his Southern colleagues, that's gone. You don't stand there and debate on the U.S. Senate floor. You give a speech, you leave the floor. And then they're like, hey, we're going to call a vote, and you come in, you give them a thumbs up, thumbs down. But that stuff happens in Missouri. In fact, this is one of my favorite things. The House of Representatives, I'm biased to love them. The House of Representatives has a laptop on every table. They have a C-SPAN. They have like 5 C-SPAN cameras. So when you're on the floor, you're talking. and it's pretty cool. The Senate, there are no computers on the floor. They don't allow them on the floor. There's no cameras in the state Senate. So there's audio, there's no video. Senators are just like, we're just never going to change this. But they actually have long conversations with each other. And it's fascinating because I think it's actually good. The last couple of years, there's been some pretty bad gridlock. It's way better this year. But I think those long conversations with each other, no technology or less technology, long debates with each other is dramatically better than what we see at the federal level, where, again, it's all tribalism. You all stay in your own corners.
Yeah.
You try to change the nationals' opinions, but you're not actually passing bills and moving the ball forward. Maybe a little bit in the budget process and maybe via executive order.
Two questions then. Well, how would you change it then? Do you have a desire to change it at the federal level? And what would you change? What is the contributing factor, right? So there are some issues about corporate money in politics, right? It seems to me that you do have corporate interests that are largely controlling the media, right? We all know that the media is the mechanism in order to control the masses.
Yeah, although the media is very different than it used to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very, like, if you're a corporation, it's very difficult now to control media because, like, what are you going to go, like, X?
You buy Twitter, right?
I was going to say, yeah, you could.
You buy the Washington Post.
But if you look at what Elon's done to X, which is now probably the most popular social media site to discuss politics on.
Yeah.
Blue Sky is a horrific alternative on the left, just like Truth Social is on the right. Neither one of them ever is getting the interest. And Elon has essentially turned Twitter into a no holds barred, anything goes, free market space.
I'll disagree a little bit and I'll show you why.
I assume going to like community notes or algorithms or whatever. And I understand that. But there's nowhere else that you can have such an unfettered debate with people anywhere right now in America.
Sure.
And the second part of that is the people that you listen to, you choose them. It used to be 30 years ago, it was NBC, CBS, ABC. Then maybe you had like Fox and MSNBC. And now you got OANN and you know, Newsmax and whatever else. But now you go on X, you're just like, let me find the person that I agree with and amplify their stuff. Well, it's really difficult to say we're going to control all these voices. So yeah, corporations each try to get their own people saying what they want to say, but it's you don't just say, oh, we go by NBC and we control the news now to most of America. It's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
No, it definitely is not like that anymore.
No, it's not like that anymore. Let me dig in there just a hair. And I don't, Mike, I know that you've got questions too. So let me know if I'm bogarting it here.
Well, and before you go, 10 minutes, and then I've kind of got an idea for a structure.
Okay. Yep. So one of the things that I did with X when I was deeply disappointed with what Elon Musk did with X. He's basically a multi-billionaire who clearly showed that he was interested in influencing politics, purchased a mechanism to do so, and intentionally modified the algorithms and the content there, or personally boosted things in order to gain an outcome that he had. And it goes against all my principle that somebody can literally buy that much influence right out of their pocket. And here's what I noticed. So as a protest vote, I canceled my account, killed it off, and said, hey, I don't want to support this, and I want to show, hopefully it'll show the world that there's a drop in people interested in X.
You showed them.
I showed them. However, I quickly found that there was some content on there that I needed an account to see. So I recreated a content, haven't followed anybody. All of the recommended content is really right wing. I mean, it's all right wing. I can scroll for a page and a half before I get any dissenting comments, if that makes sense. That tells me that the platform is not just this battleground of ideas. It's really becoming a right wing propaganda machine.
Which is also not to say that it isn't either. Mm-hmm. It's just densely populated with right-wing users.
Maybe. I have a hard time thinking it may be, because certainly you've got some people who've gone to Blue Sky. But the fact that all of the recommended content follow these people.
Okay. Yeah.
When I look at follow these people and all these people, the list is a mile long on the right before you ever get to anybody on the left.
I would posit the theory that all media forever has been this way. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think we'll ever have a truly, I mean, people say, oh, well, this is neutral. Nothing's neutral. Everybody starts with a predilection one way or the other. And I think that we are now seeing, obviously, Elon, who 10 years ago was a massive liberal, and now is a conservative libertarian. I'm not sure what the right word is.
Yeah, good luck coming up with a definition.
Yeah, very, very sort of off, but he certainly is favor of the right in its current form.
Yeah.
But it's also the first time we've seen somebody, or at least in the modern era, say, I'm going to set up a right-wing network. It is not and obviously I'm a conservative. I love it because I remember during 2020, and I think this is, if you listen to Elon, you believe him, this is what really turned him from left to right, is a lot of these social media sites saying, oh, you can't share an opinion about the vaccine or about COVID because the medical community, and primarily the Biden administration, the DOJ, were threatening them, saying, oh, misinformation gets you shut down. And Elon just was like, whoa, I thought it was a liberal. I thought we were the free speech party. So I'm going to go change this. And so for me as a conservative, it's not hard for me to find liberal opinions. I would agree Twitter has moved dramatically to the right since Elon bought it. Obviously, from my perspective, that's a good thing because it's the only platform that I can really go to and feel that way. Now, Facebook, frankly, is trash. And it's not really worth utilizing anymore.
I think Zuckerberg fucked us. So my issue with Facebook entirely is that he allowed political speech through the 2016 and up to the 2020 election. Obviously, we had, I'm going to call it the insurrection, and Facebook and Twitter both cracked down on Trump and anti-American speech kind of thing, basically the riot stuff. The problem is that Zuckerberg kept that up, right? They downplayed all political speech, so those people who are only in Facebook are only getting their cat feeds and the other things and really not seeing some of the political influence that other people are trying to show there. And certainly now, as of the 2024 election, he's like, no, we're good. We'll go ahead and turn political speech back on. And he's got a rightward lean too.
Well, and I don't think Zuckerberg's actually conservative. I think Zuckerberg's just a capitalist.
He's just playing it?
Well, yeah. And
He's
I think, Biden was in charge. And so I got to do whatever they want. And now Trump's in charge. So I'll do whatever, I think he's just a straight capitalist. I think Elon, he got radicalized. I frankly think it had a lot to do with some things that happened with some of his many children. Yeah. And I think he blames the California, the medical community, whatever it was, for a lot of that. And so I think that pushed him a direction, and he said, okay, I'm going to engage. And if you watch, he did spend a lot of money on the election, probably not as much as Soros, but in a different way. But I remember he got interviewed by Joe Rogan like 2 weeks out, and he was like, if we lose, I'm probably getting arrested and you're probably next. And it's sort of funny to listen to, but he just was like, listen, we've invaded the home of a president and we indicted him, or a former president, we indicted him. And so, listen, this is just the new, the tactics are rougher than they've ever been before. And so just be prepared for that. And I think, a lot of, whether it's free speech, what happened with his children, or his visualization of what happened at the federal level made him much more conservative than he was. And so he's like, I'm going to go find a social media site that will be that. Facebook was never going to be it. I'm not on TikTok because I think I don't like ByteDance, and I don't want to sell my data or whatever. And I've never been on Instagram. So X is really all I've got. And I love it for that. I don't post nearly as much as a lot of people, but I read content there. That's where I go for almost all my content.
Do you have we actually talked about social media endlessly. And I'm curious, do you have a desire at all for a different experience in social media? Like kind of just pause and think about social media as it exists right now. Somebody posts something, there's a comment thread. You can engage in that comment thread with short form. It's hard to engage, just kind of fully rethink this idea. I would love the idea of something that was actually joyful to use again, and not necessarily something that's I'm hopping in the cockpit to go on a mission to
get my rage on,
right, or whatever. I miss that. Do you desire that at all, or do you like where we're at?
I mean, I don't necessarily like where we're at, but I think a lot of people, it's the same thing we started with. Most of the times you get interested in the government because you either want to change something or the government is impeding something you're doing. And so most times your reaction to government is generally negative. And when you have a social media site that allows you to say that publicly, we take in the middle school bathroom wall and it's now what we log into every day. And so it's rage. It's like, oh my gosh, I hate this person.
Yeah, no, that's why I come back to the simple idea we fucked ourselves with technology.
Well, there's a
we
local,
have no other